Well, President Obama has an idea to get more people to the polls on Election Day. He thinks it would help offset the influence of big money in politics.
In Australia and some other countries, there's mandatory voting. It would be transformative if everybody voted. That would counteract money more than anything. It would completely change the political map in this country. Because the people who tend not to vote are young, they're lower income, they're skewed more heavily towards immigrant groups and minority groups. There's a reason why some folks try to keep them away from the polls. We should want to get them into the polls.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong if all eligible voters are required to vote?
President Obama very upset with Joe Biden. Should he have removed Biden from office after he made the now legendary "your mama" joke to Vladimir Putin?
No, I don't feel that he should.
Did you think it was funny?
I thought it was.
What is your take on President Obama's decision to name Dennis Rodman ambassador to North Korea?
I don't think he has the experience for that position. I think the current ambassador is doing a great job. We have really excellent relations with North Korea right now. It doesn't need to be.
Very excellent. Yeah, so why don't we use Watters World, Greg? I mean, that's what would happen. We should have used the Watters World clip. I mean, can't they just for one day not tell us what to do?
Well, if you don't like it, we can force you to like it. That's kind of the liberal mantra. But look, the government shouldn't be able to force you to do anything, which is why I love the draft, but I have to be against it because you can't force people to do things. So I even have to give up certain things that I like that I would like to have bad manners against the law, but I can't. And if the government forces you to do something, then the government no longer has to persuade you. It no longer has to be competent. If you have a draft, you don't have to explain the war. If you force people to vote, you really don't have to try that hard. That's the reason why force makes government incompetent and dangerous.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, wouldn't the opposite happen? Because if everybody had to vote, then they would spend money and even millions more trying to target even more people to get out the vote.
I hate that. First of all, President Obama cites some countries have a mandatory, they're required to vote. Some countries also have a mandatory military service. Would he prefer that as well? Would he like that as well? Tie them both together. The answer would be no. Mandatory, mandate. Obamacare, the guy's out of control. It's almost like dictatorship going on. This is what I want to do. We will mandate you to do this. What's next? Mandate you to, I don't know, stop smoking, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. This is a terrible idea. Mostly for what Greg points out, that if you don't like a Republican and a Democrat, you're going to be forced to vote for one of those?
Right.
This is a god-awful idea.
And the constitutional professor seems to have forgotten that in the Constitution, we have the right to associate with whatever political party we want, Dana, or we can disassociate altogether.
The great thing about America is that voting is a privilege, and you earn it, and you can exercise it if you want. People are trying to come to America so that they can have the freedom to express their opinions however they want. If another place they have mandatory voting would be a place like Russia, where Putin gets reelected by 98% of the vote, right? How do you think that happens? That's what happens when you I'm not saying that happens everywhere. There's only 11 countries in the world that have mandatory voting. Other countries like Italy gave it up in 1993. They said you cannot infringe on somebody's human right in their decision whether to vote or not.
Julie, you love this idea, I'm sure, and I bet you're supportive of a police force that's going to get people out to vote and then penalize them and tax them if they don't vote. What else is coming?
I hate this idea. This is the stupidest idea ever. You cannot, and Dana, you nailed it, you cannot force somebody to do something they don't want to do. And the reality is, and don't start with Obamacare because that's different. Because I know where you're going. Because I will tell you why. Because you not voting doesn't affect me. You not having health care, I end up paying for your health care when you go to the hospital. So that's different. But when it comes to voting, when it comes to voting,
the mandate part is
when it comes to voting, you have every right, as you said, to disengage. You don't want to engage? That's your right. Nobody should be forced to vote. This is a really dumb idea.
Again, if you can't persuade people to come, like he's still mad about the 2014 election. He's still like, oh, if only people had come out and voted for me.
Vote for me.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with this country. In his heart, he believes there's something wrong with this country. And if you could just force change, everything would be better.
But you're not happy with this, right, Joseph?
No, I'm not happy with it at all. Look, voting is speech.
It's individual voters speaking to the government in the privacy of a voting booth. You have the right to free speech. The corollary to free speech is you have the right to remain silent. The government cannot force speech. The government cannot force voting. What kind of a right is this, the right to vote, if you don't have the right to decide whether or not to exercise the right? This is, forgive me, a totalitarian impulse that he would march people into the voting booth and say...
It might be totalitarian, but in Australia. They do it in Australia. They do it in Brazil, in Cyprus, Ecuador. Liechtenstein, Luxembourg.
With the exception of Australia, none of these countries are countries that we would want to emulate. And quite frankly, I was surprised to learn about it in Australia.
Well, apparently the reasoning for there is that they took the money out of it, the money out of politics, so that special interest groups couldn't have sway and hold.
But the concept of a right is that you have the right to decide whether or not to exercise it. The government can't force you to stand up and say yes. It can't force you to stand up and make a decision. You have the right to be left alone, and you have the right not to make a decision. Many people vote by not voting. They're basically saying, a pox on both your houses. I don't want either of you to be president. I want whichever one of you wins to be a minority president. That's a form of expression which the government can't resist.
Why can't we be like North Korea? No, that guy won with 100% of the vote. What are the odds? What are the odds? But, you know, countries that had it and that took it away largely because of wars. Austria had it, took it away. Italy had it, took it away.
You mean the mandatory?
Right.
Yeah.
Spain had it, took it away. I would think from their experiences we would learn that there is such a thing about being a little totalitarian.
Every one of those countries that you just ticked off went through a totalitarian, fascist, horrific, destructive phase.
And they said right afterwards, the hell with this.
When they came out of it, absolutely. Is that where he wants to bring us?
Where do you go with this? Let's say that's the direction he wants. How does that jibe with his saying it's no big deal to bring ID with you, and you shouldn't have to? So in other words, it's obviously something he should be forced and etched into law, but proof that you're a citizen and can be doing something that he has forced and etched into law needn't be.
He's lost the ID debate because the Supreme Court has upheld the Indiana law, which is the Indiana model, which requires an ID. Texas mimicked Indiana. The Supreme Court said we're not even going to hear the case. Texas is perfectly acceptable. So all states that follow that Indiana model, it was just the second one to get there. The first one they threw out, the second one they did.
Right.
Will be accepted by the court. But here's what here's the boat the president also misses. Why is this an Indiana model? Because it's a state model. Because in America, there is no national federal election. There are 50 state elections. So the states set the terms for election. He couldn't have the Congress do this even if he wanted to, because that's an area reserved to the states. How can that constitutional scholar have forgotten that?
It's a very good point.